There comes a time in every man's life where he must rise to meet and even exceed the expectations of millions of eyes, where he must endure trials and tribulations far beyond anything thought to be withstandable by any man, make or break situations that will either send him into stardom or crumple them into dust. A situation such as this is an extreme rarity, but on February 1st of 2005, this exact situation unfolded. The Great Snail Race. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is SRS Fico. Dude, great vibing. Oh my god, he hit a landmine. You know the drill by now. I have a Twitch, it's dope, it's sick, we have merch. Let's get into it. I also have a YouTube and Twitter and stuff, but yeah, you know. The Great Snail Race of 2005 was a spectacle, to say the very least. Saying this was the most intense 100-yard dash this side of the Mississippi is a monumental understatement. It was less of a race and more of a survival of the fittest. A Hunger Games-esque competition, if you will. And a competition of this magnitude requires massively intense training and preparation. Everything from technique to stamina to diet must be taken into consideration. Not only that, but choosing the correct coach is also crucial. One unfortunate contestant seems to have forgotten this last requirement. And he, Gerald Wilson Gary Snell Jr., paid the price severely. Gary's trainer, a Mr. SpongeBob SquarePants, to put it frankly, had absolutely no idea what he was doing. He started by making Gary some strange concoction of kelp powder, raw eggs, and literal iron nails. I mean, if that doesn't show you this guy was completely out of his league when it comes to being a personal coach, I don't know what will. His inadequacy as a personal trainer really comes into perspective when the actual training section of Gary's routine comes into play. He pushes Gary far too hard. Granted, they only had one day to prepare for the competition, but that is no excuse to give your clients zero breaks and force them into a state of exhaustion. The lack of awareness in this situation to be able to push this snail so hard to the point of, on race day, literally collapsing and eventually getting into a ginormous wreck as a result of fatigue is appalling. Speaking of which, now that the table's set, let's dive right into the race itself. At the starting line, you can already tell something's up. He's not looking too hot, and taking a peek down the line to see the rest of the competition, he's gonna have his work cut out for him. Between the tough competition and the fact that he was worked way too hard the night before, it seems that Gary is stuck between a rock and a hard place. Anyways, the race begins with his main proponent Snelly the Snail rocketing off the starting line, leaving both Gary and Rocky, who is, yes, a literal rock, in the dust. Mr. Bob is having none of this and immediately gets on Gary and tells him that he needs to hurry up and go before he loses this race. After a little more motivation, Gary finally gets up and going. But this is when stuff really starts to go downhill. Quickly, too. At this point, the commentator takes notice and even calls out the coach for pushing Gary far too hard. SpongeBob continues to scream at Gary until he sustains a blowout. And then another. Be warned, the footage I'm about to play on screen is extremely graphic, and continues to be as Gary blows a head gasket completely off. Finally, SpongeBob realizes the severity of the situation he's created and tells Gary that he doesn't have to keep pushing himself. But it's already too late. Gary begins to spin out of control, eventually grinding and smashing into a wall, causing a monumental explosion. SpongeBob quickly runs out to assess the damage, and it's not looking good. And so does an apparent new friend, as Snelly the Snail stops right before the finish line and turns around to come comfort Gary. Apparently it worked because Gary is instantly rejuvenated and they both stare at each other intently and purr for some reason. But while this is going on, Rocky makes his play and eventually becomes the winner of this great snail race. A rock won the snail race. Yep, this situation could have ended much, much worse than it did, and I'm glad all we walked away with was a lesson. People need breaks. You can't keep pushing them. If you just keep going and going, you'll eventually burn yourself out and die. So yeah, don't die. Also, happy April Fool's Day.